it. In Trump's first term, he briefly and inexplicably named this guy Matt Whitaker to be acting Attorney General of the United States, the masculine toilet, you've been squatched guy. Trump eventually claimed he didn't know Matthew Whitaker, had never heard of him. That was after he had named him as Attorney General. It was all a very weird series of events. But whatever happened to that guy? Trump has named him to something else this time around. He has named him to be the new United States ambassador to NATO? Matt Whitaker has no experience being an ambassador or being any kind of diplomat or having anything to do with diplomacy in any way or anything related to foreign policy. He also has no military experience. So obviously he's the perfect choice to be our ambassador to the world's largest military alliance. At his confirmation hearing this week, Whitaker was asked about the Trump administration's commitment to NATO. Whitaker told senators that commitment will be, quote, ironclad. Ironclad. He said that on Tuesday. On Thursday, Donald Trump himself characterized his commitment to NATO somewhat differently. Quote, Donald Trump has cast doubt on his willingness to defend Washington's NATO allies, saying he would not do so if they are not paying enough for their own defense. Trump telling reporters in the Oval Office, quote, it's common sense, right? If they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. No, I'm not going to defend them. What's the opposite of ironclad? I mean, we all keep wondering if Donald Trump is going to pull the U.S. out of NATO, but he kind of just did by word, if not by deed, right? The NATO commitment is a commitment to defend each other. It only works if your adversaries believe you're going to do it. If the American president is now just out there saying, I'm not going to defend those other countries, that's kind of the whole ballgame, whether or not we formally withdraw from NATO or not. The latest Reuters Ipsos polling shows that while Americans did approve of Trump on foreign policy by 2 points in January, 39 to 37, they now disapprove of Trump on foreign policy by 13 points, 50 to 37%. When Americans are asked whether they personally sympathize more with Ukraine or Russia, 56% of Americans say Ukraine, 3% say Russia. 3%. Trump is in lonely territory here. And that stark public opinion on this issue raises the question as to whether or not there's going to be some democratic limit, some democratic friction in terms of how far Trump can push U.S. foreign policy to essentially make the United States into a subsidiary of the Russian Federation, right? Trumpistan or Ameristan if we're lucky. Just this week, Trump cut off military aid to Ukraine. It was an order so sudden. NBC News reports that planes carrying military equipment to Ukraine were literally turned around in midair. Trump also cut off intelligence sharing with Ukraine, which is way more consequential than it might sound. From the Associated Press, quote, the suspension of intelligence disrupts Ukraine's ability to track and target Russian troops, tanks, and ships. Ukraine's other allies lack the same resources to fill the gap. In other words, we're forcing Ukraine now to fight blind. Today, Simon Schuster at Time Magazine cites 5 senior Western and Ukrainian officials and military officers in reporting this. Quote, the U.S. decision to suspend the flow of military intelligence to Ukraine this week has aided the Russian advance along a critical part of the front, weakening the negotiating position of President Zelensky and killing many Ukrainian soldiers in recent days. Now we've learned that Trump has even cut off Ukraine's access to commercial satellite imagery purchased by the U.S. So not just military aid, not just U.S. intelligence, but also commercial satellite imagery. Quote, commanders and soldiers keep tabs on where enemy positions and depots are, making it easier to find vulnerabilities in troop movements. They help logistics soldiers plan vehicle routes with alternative corridors laid out if pathways are mined or destroyed. Washington Post says tonight, quote, the suspension was immediately felt by soldiers in the Ukrainian military, some of whom described the decision as treachery, not politics. This is serious stuff. And here in the U.S., we are starting to see it boomerang a little bit, starting to see the other side of that coin already. And then NBC News reporting this headline, quote, as Trump pivots to Russia, allies weigh sharing less intel with the U.S. Quote, some U.S. allies are considering scaling back the intelligence they share with Washington in response to the Trump administration's conciliatory approach to Russia. The allies are weighing the move because of concerns about safeguarding foreign assets whose identities could inadvertently be revealed. NBC News citing 5 sources with direct knowledge of the discussions, including 2 foreign officials. Quote, the allies, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, and members of the so-called Five Eyes spy alliance of us, the UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, are examining how to possibly revise current protocols for sharing intelligence to take the Trump administration's warming relations with Russia into account. These are our closest intelligence partners and have been for decades. And it's not a one-way street. We benefit from their intelligence too, right? But maybe not any longer. There are material consequences in Ukrainian lives and elsewise. There are consequences to switching sides, to not just giving up the title of the leader of the free world, but to actively switching sides so your country is now actively working against it. Joining us now is Mark Polymeropoulos. He's a 26-year veteran of the CIA. He's also an MSNBC national security and intelligence analyst. Mr. Polymeropoulos, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Good to be here.
So hearing me describe that reporting, let me just ask you if I'm getting any of that the wrong way around or putting too much or too little emphasis on any part of it as you see it in terms of the impact here.
Well, Rachel, let me tell you, the order to stop sharing intelligence with Ukraine, I think, hit the intelligence community like a seismic shockwave. And for 10 years, the IC, the intelligence community, and members of my old outfit, the CIA, have been with the Ukrainians, not just since the invasion, but 10 years. That's providing things such as resources, capacity building, certainly training. It was we were in it in the fight and the struggle against Russia, and so this is seen as an incredible betrayal. I mean, members of my old outfit, remember, have fought with them or been in the trenches with them, have mourned when they lost, soldiers, celebrated in successes. But to see, frankly, this not only kind of at one point a neutral stance by the United States, but now tilting towards Moscow, it's disorienting to members of the IC, the intelligence community, because again, we're now in essence on the side of an enemy.
Given the nature of the fight right now between Ukraine and Russia, flipping the switch like this, not just stopping those planefuls of weapons, but also turning off the sharing of intelligence, turning off their access to commercial satellite material, it does seem like it's not just refusing to help. It feels like it is trying to rush Ukraine toward a catastrophic loss. I have read analysts say that with what we are now doing to them to effectively shove them toward defeat, that the question is existential for Ukraine, basically based on whether or not Europe can try to recreate some of what we were supplying. The removal of it essentially guarantees failure.
Well, Rachel, the U.S. has been an incredible ally of Ukraine in the past, providing so many different things, not only, as you said, military ordnance equipment, but also key intelligence. And when we stop providing these targeting packages to the Ukrainians, that means that they can't hit, either Russian forces inside Russian occupied Ukraine or in Russia itself. And the result is the Russians will be able to then attack civilians in Ukrainian cities or, of course, Ukrainian military targets. But let's be very clear, Ukrainians are going to die because of this. And I think that's why this is absolutely so stunning. Again, an ally, that we were with side by side for a decade, we have now abandoned, and the Ukrainians who we were supporting, who we were with against, again, in the trenches, are really going to suffer. So it's an incredible moral injury for the U.S. intelligence community, but of course it's incredibly damaging for the Ukrainians who are going to suffer. And we saw that over the last several days with results of, these increased Russian drone and missile strikes.
Yeah, and if this Time magazine reporting, Simon Schuster, is correct, you may be able to measure the cost of what Trump's done here in hundreds of lives already among Ukrainian soldiers. Mark Polymeropoulos, former senior CIA officer, I really appreciate you joining us on this tough story tonight. Thank you.